And you still have to pay. Oh, yep.
Yes.
That hurts.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm spending so much money
Right.
to still watch our kids while we work. That's great.
I know. Oh, that's been,
And while we're also sick too.
yeah, that's definitely been an adjustment for sure. We do have a YouTube channel that we upload these talks to, so if you know somebody that couldn't make it to tonight but could benefit from the discussion, they can always join us on our YouTube channel. So, and I will drop the link, Lauren, if you go to our online Lansing chapter page, the link is on there somewhere, but I'll put it in here. If I forget, someone please remind me. So, all right, so principles of Jira administration. So we'll start with a little bit of intro. There are 4 principles that I've chosen to cover today. I am definitely interested in hearing what additional principles you might add to that list, and you don't have to be a Jira administrator to add to that list. So we'll cover those main areas and have some good discussions there, and then we'll talk about what's coming up next for the Lansing chapter, and then we'll wrap it up and go home. So, any questions? Awesome. And then for the people that are joining us virtually, I've got the chat window on the screen, so know that when you communicate through the chat, we're going to engage with you as well. So, all right. So let's talk about the why. I know I mentioned a little bit earlier that, this is a good opportunity to add some clarity to what good practices or best practices would look like in the Atlassian ecosystem. But I think it also is important to increase that transparency, right, into how decisions are made. Why are they made, right? It's very easy to just say yes or say no, but without being able to answer why and without being able to promote understanding, you end up with disgruntled people that you'd have to work with. So this is an opportunity to peel back the curtain for those of you that are not Jira administrators into understanding what happens behind the scenes. And then there obviously with administering anything, there's best practices that we can take advantage of to keep the system healthy. Because as we all know, Jira and the larger Atlassian ecosystem is pretty flexible, which is great if you want to do some crazy cool stuff in there. But if left unchecked, it can lead to some pretty messy sites. And I have seen those and they're crazy. So I do want to point out that, because we are talking about principles here, we are going to be talking pretty generic for the most part. So a lot of the things we talk about today would be applicable to any other enterprise systems that would require a level of administration. So it's not specific to Jira, it's not specific to Atlassian. There is, of course, an Atlassian slant to some of the things we talk about today, but the concepts and principles are transferable. So let's talk about the first principle. And I'm not very good at wording these principles, so someone better with words after we have this discussion can probably give me some feedback here. But something I've noticed in my experience, and I'm curious to know what you've all seen in the wild, is that a good practice is when you're administering a Jira site is only provision users as administrators on an as-needed basis. So there are a few reasons for that, and that's not specific to just Jira, but the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more conflicts you're likely to have, right? When you don't have enough people talking to each other, but they all have access to a lot of functionality, you'll end up with conflicts, right? And yeah, as Lauren said, with great power comes great responsibility. So, there is a reason why the pool of administrators gets smaller and smaller the higher up you go. Something that I have personally seen is that oftentimes if we don't fully understand what different types of administrators can do, we'll just make a lazy assumption that, if this person's trying to do this, I'm just going to give them administrator access so they can do it and trust that they won't mess anything up. And I'm pretty much an optimist in some instances to a naive point, but I don't think a lot of people have malicious intent when they go into a big system. but you can make mistakes, right? You don't know what you've accidentally touched or what you've done. So, there was one instance a couple of months ago, someone was made an administrator. I don't even know how it happened, but they ended up changing the in progress status to something different. And as we all know, in progress is a very commonly used status. So got a lot of tickets saying, hey, what happened to my status? It disappeared. It turns out it was a mistake. So we want to protect our site from situations that may happen like that. Has anybody here had or worked in a situation or in a Atlassian environment where you had too many administrators, or you were aware that there were too many administrators? What happened there? If you
The site was horrible.
Really? Okay.
So messy, over 800 custom fields, and like, same example as you had, like, someone renamed the open status to kickoff. And it affected over 800 workflows, so like, we got tickets like, my tickets are all wrong, like, I've got this new status called kickoff, I have no idea what that means, like. And I was like, well, that's what happens when you give 150 people admin, right? It's like, don't do
Wait,
that.
150, is that just?
Yeah, there was
for
150 admins.
150? Oh my goodness.
Like, every JSM agent, they also just made an administrator, and I was like, we should not do that,
Wow.
first of all.
I feel like you would probably need 150 admins if you had like a single Atlassian site for the entire US or something
Right.
crazy like that, or the entire state of Michigan. That's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah. It was
Okay.
so- Yeah,
I had somebody change the default filter for my Jira boards.
Oh, whoa, really?
Yeah.
So people showed up the next day and was there no work on their boards, or they're like, all right.
It was all filtered down to one very specific work stream.
Oh my goodness.
You couldn't see anything else.
Wow. Hey, we finished the sprint early. Hooray, right? Josh is saying he's also been in an instance with too many Jira admins. Have you experienced something similar to what we've discussed here, Josh, or anything different that you saw, for better or worse? Someone changing workflow
Sorry, I
steps.
totally forgot I have a microphone. Yeah, no,
No,
we
that's
had-
okay. That's okay.
I'm like typing in the chat. No, we had the same issue. Alright. We had the same issue where someone changed a step in the work or a status in the workflow, not realizing it was shared with like 20 other projects. So same issue.
Yeah. Man, yeah, that's wild. So I think we've proven the point, right? We understand why we want to limit administration. So yeah, it's funny. I was talking to someone today and they were messaging me. They're like, you mean I can't change my workflow? I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but I'm happy to change the workflow for you. What do you need, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well,
They put in a ticket.
I did have to put in a ticket, which we'll talk
Yeah.
about in a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know the complete answer to, making sure you have a completely stable site. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I said this already, is that having a clear understanding of what the different types of administrators are in Jira can help, right? So people know what they can do, and more importantly, what they can't do. So let's talk about what that model looks like. So if you are on Jira Data Center or currently Jira Server, anybody here working on an instance that's on-premise server data center? Okay, yeah. If you're working in data center, you have these levels of administration. Your system administrator is someone that is considered your top level administrator. Not only do they have the ability to configure various functionality throughout the site, but they also have the ability to manage any third-party marketplace applications. So anytime you have a request to add X-Ray or Script Runner, any one of those popular or not so popular applications, you're going to need a system administrator to help you out with that. Right below that, and I have to be careful with the language I'm using, is that you do have a Jira administrator, and they basically can do what a system administrator can do, except for managing site level functionality such as your marketplace applications and anything like that. I do apologize, the text is pretty small here, but if you wanted to talk to a Jira administrator, they would be the person that would be modifying your workflows and adding new statuses and adding new custom fields, hopefully not 800 of them, right? But they would be the go-to if you needed some adjustments made to your project that you realize you're not able to do for yourself. Any questions on those two different types of administrators before I go on? Okay. A project administrator is someone that basically administers the project. So as we all know, in the Jira ecosystem, everything comes down to a project, right? All of your different data lives in different projects, right? So projects are a very important configuration in the Jira realm, data center or not. If you are a project administrator, then you have the ability to configure certain types of functionality based on the project type. So if you are a project administrator for a Jira software project, you'll be able to control the configuration of things such as components, versions, user access. When I say user access, I mean, depending on how your permission schemes are set up, you actually would have the ability to control who can even see your project and to an extent, what they can do within your project. So that's based on project role functionality. So if your permission scheme is primarily based on project roles, which is a good practice to follow because it shifts administration to your project administrator, then your project administrator can pick and choose which users belong to which roles. And then that in turn affects what they can or cannot do. Especially in data center, and we'll talk about cloud next, is as a project administrator, you will be able to configure automation rules that apply to your project alone. So being able to create them from scratch and, you know, perform certain actions and do all sorts of crazy wizardry stuff, you'd be able to do that as a project administrator. The only difference from an automation rule perspective between a project administrator and a Jira administrator is that a project administrator can only create automation rules that are scoped to that project, whereas a Jira administrator can create automation rules that span multiple projects. So yeah, that's what a project administrator does. And then more common, you know, more people usually that work within a Jira site fall into this last category. They can be a board administrator. And so that allows you to manage configurations that exist on a board. So this level of administration is only available if you're using Jira software. Jira work management, Jira service management, you don't have the ability to create multiple boards, so you don't have this level of administration there. If you're a board administrator and you open the board settings, the things that you can do, you have the ability to specify who else can be an administrator on your board. You can map different workflow statuses to different columns that you can create. You can monitor other various pieces of functionality such as card colors, card layouts, what estimation metric you're going to use on your board, whether it's Scrum or Kanban, and whether that should pull from a system field or from a custom field. Those things like that apply at the board level, and you'd be able to manage that. Oftentimes, I've had to field requests from someone that's a board administrator asking me if I could create a column for them on their board, and you know, I've told them, hey, you're a board administrator, you can do this yourself. It always feels great to tell people that they have the power and, you know, it's safe, right? One thing I want to point out is that obviously the different sizes of the circles mean something. You know, the larger the circle, the more of those types of administrators you would typically have on a site. So, you know, if you're primarily a Jira software shop, you're going to have a lot of board administrators. But that number should get smaller the further up you go, right? So that's something to point out. One thing I've seen is that sometimes when people try to give somebody board administrator access, they'll inadvertently make them a project administrator, and that always doesn't work. Generally, when that happens, you're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, right? So you may do 3 or 4 different things. That includes making someone a project administrator. And then they're able to go into the board settings and say, oh, I can do board administration stuff. But that may mislead you into thinking that you had to make them a project administrator when that's not really the case. So Any questions or any thoughts, or is there anything I'm missing here that I didn't cover that we can add to the data center administrator model?
I think I hit it from this level.
Okay,
I'm sorry, so
yeah,
can you be a project administrator without being a board administrator in this model?
you can. So I'm actually glad you brought that up because
I'm just
these,
thinking through the problems that I've had.
yeah,
Why can't I fix this board if I'm a project administrator? So.
yeah, that's a good question. So the reason why they are separate circles is that, you know, having a higher level of administration doesn't automatically grant you
Okay.
access to a different level of administration. If what's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, so, the question was, what was the question again, Kim? I'm sorry.
My question is, my project administrator, does that automatically mean that I could I'm also a board administrator, and your answer was no.
Okay, yeah, the question is, if I'm a project administrator, can I also by default become a board administrator? Yeah, the answer is not by default.
Yeah.
Now, at various levels, you can make that behavior the default. So for example, you can configure your Jira site where somebody can be a system administrator, but not a Jira administrator. That involves specifying which groups get a specific global permission. And, you know, but by default, if you are a system administrator, you're going to get the global Jira administration privilege, but it doesn't have to be that way. So you do get flexibility there. Likewise, you can also be a project administrator and not be a Jira administrator. And that is set up within the project. So in your permission scheme, you can say that anybody that has the project role of administrator, that makes them a project administrator. But that doesn't mean that Jira administrators can become project administrators. Now, I hope I'm not like saying a bunch of words so fast that I'm losing everybody, but as a Jira administrator, you do have the ability to see all of the projects. So if you needed to temporarily make yourself a project administrator in a project to service the project for whatever reason, you could go in from the Jira administrator level and make yourself a project administrator and then give yourself those additional rights. But it doesn't have to be set up that way. So the levels of administration are independent in that sense, just to give you a little bit more flexibility to how you want to divvy out responsibilities.
Yeah, and some have more default overlap than others, but like specifically with the board administrator, that's not necessarily default what a project administrator can do. Like you have to kind of set yourself up with those permissions.
Right, yeah, so can you say that again? So I was about to repeat it and I forgot.
You're fine. Some administrators have more overlap than others. Board administrators, because they're kind of the smallest scope of administrator, it's kind of their own separate thing. From
Yep.
project admin.
Yes.
Go back to the before question.
Yep, yeah, so you can have overlap between different levels of administrators, but that's going to be up to how your site is configured,
Right.
right? So, and yeah, board administrators are unique administrators because, you know, it's very scoped to a specific board within a project, right? You could have 5 boards within a project, and if you're a board administrator in one board, that doesn't mean you have administrator access to the other boards in the project. So you get a lot of flexibility there. But it also does make it difficult if you're onboarding or offboarding somebody, right? Making sure that you switch users in and out. And that's also another issue I've seen. So,
We had to do that recently on my project. We had one of our BAs move off team. And then we were doing cleanup because we had a lot of boards. And I needed to, luckily she still works with us, so I was able to just kind of ping her and go, hey, I need access to these 10 boards so that I can close them.
okay, so you offboarded a person and
Yeah.
they had administrator stuff to a bunch of boards and.
And they'd gone through and done their diligence because they're more Jira savvy than I am.
Mhm.
But it just didn't take on the board, so we had to go back to it.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
We had an issue similar to that when one of our scrum masters left and all the boards that she had created the filters for, we no longer had access to the filter.
Yeah.
So we couldn't change it.
Gotcha, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's those things that you don't think about initially, like people leaving or people jumping on, okay. how many places did this person have their fingers in, right? That's not always a straightforward thing to
like,
track.
We were admins on the board, but the filter for the board was under her only.
Oh, okay.
That's why when I make filters, I will go, even though it's painful to step back and go into details when I'm moving quick,
Mhm.
I usually go and like add a level of access that it can edit that board or that filter, just in case somebody else needs to get at it or wants to change it later.
Well, but you have to be careful who you do that to, or otherwise they go in and they change your filter one day.
Right.
And then nobody can see anything on the board.
Well, in the filter box on the board, right?
If you don't have access to change things about the board.
Oh, okay.
And then we're something secondarily, whether you have access to a board, there's sometimes you get tripped up where you don't have access to a filter that's in play. And so when I make a filter, it's just mine. So I go right back in and I say edit, you know, and this is lazy. This is almost like making people administrators. I say everybody on my project can edit this filter because my filters aren't secret, but that's like a quick way to make sure you can get at it.
Right.
And then nobody touches my filters. I got too many and they don't know where they are. It's fine.
Yeah, so the discussion happening here was, especially when it comes to filters, by default, it's tied to your personal account. So you don't always think about who those filters need to be shared with, right? Unless you're attaching a filter to a board or anything like that. So Doc pointed out, what's that?
Dashboards, you learn real quick.
Oh,
how to
there you
share
go.
those filters when you're making dashboards.
That's right.
Can you
Yeah.
see the dashboard? Yes. Can you see the widgets? I can see two of them. All right.
Exactly.
Josh pointed out some good things in here. So Erica, this reminded me, I was reminded of this when you were talking earlier, but if someone does leave and they didn't transfer their filter ownership, as a Jira administrator, you can go in and change the owner. So so that does help. It's one of those pages you don't frequent often, right? So you forget that it's there until
Always know who your Jira administrator is.
yeah, right.
Like that's
I
the
know you
advice.
can do this, right? Josh, you mentioned if you're a project admin, you're inherently an admin to any board in the project. I did not even realize that. Can you add some color to that?
I think you phrased it as a question.
Oh, are you? Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, answer is no. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is the answer no? I mean, I've been using Jira for a while. I thought of that when you guys were talking about this, and that's something I wondered.
Yeah, but by default, you have to provision administrative access separately. Yeah.
To the
No
board, even if it's part of
inheritance there. What's that?
So you have to give them board admin access separately, even if they're already a project admin of the project.
That's
that
correct.
holds the board. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because on data center, I know we're still on data center and we have to, we have yet to talk about cloud, but in data center, boards are like an independent, they're a concept independent of a project. So if you look at the Jira data model, they're just called like a rapid view. And it's just a board from a Jira perspective is just one way to digest data within a project. And with the way that it's set up in data center, you don't have to tie a board to a specific project. So because boards aren't like children of projects, you have that separation of administration, right? So that's also something to keep in mind. But yeah. Anything else here before we move on? Sometimes it can be a pain, like especially if you're a Jira administrator and you have to clean up the mess from, staffing changes, right? At times it would be nice to just, can you activate like a God mode or something in the system where I can go in and I have super control and you can trust me to do it all right and get things done, but.
Yeah, just hold the backslash.
Oh, the backslash, yeah, there you go, yeah. So, yeah. So that's the data center administrator model. From a cloud perspective, it's fairly similar. There are a couple of differences that are, unique to cloud that exist towards the top. So in the cloud environment, everything we've talked about with project administrators, everything we've talked about with board administrators, unchanged. Actually, everything we've talked about with Jira administrators is unchanged. In cloud, though, instead of having the concept of a system administrator, you have two different concepts. You have what is called an organization administrator, and they more or less have a similar function to what a system administrator in data center does. But if
That's
you're
a
an
site admin,
organization administrator, what's that?
Is an org admin like the same as a site admin?
Yeah, yep. And it's funny you bring that up, and I'll remind me to touch on that after we talk about these. But the question was, is an org admin a site admin? Yes, and there's some history to that. But in cloud, the concept of an organization, especially at the enterprise level, is you can have a single organization and you can have multiple Jira sites. And so that's available at like the top level Atlassian plan. And so what that means is if you're an organization administrator, you can manage stuff at the org level, which includes things like managing what products are available in your organization and which users have licenses to those products. You have the ability to manage other configurations such as security, right? If you're using Atlassian Access for SSO, and you have that integration, you can manage that. You can manage data residency. You can manage your sandbox environments. Those are things that organization administrators can do. And what's nice about an organization administrator is that they don't consume a license to any product. I mean, they can if you configure them that way, but if you had somebody that needed that top level access for the sake of billing or product management, but they're not doing day-to-day work in the Atlassian cloud ecosystem, you can make them an organization administrator and not consume a license and then, be on your merry way. Then you have this new level of administration, which I personally haven't used yet. So if anybody here, if anybody else here has, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. But you have in cloud what is called a user access administrator, and what that means is, as a user access administrator, you have the ability to provide licenses to additional users that you are a user access administrator of. So let me take a step back. If I have a license to Jira software and I am given user access administrator privileges to Jira software, if someone else joins the company I'm working at, or they join the team that I'm on, and they need a Jira software license, I have the ability to give them that license, even though I'm not an organization administrator. So it's a new level that's been introduced to help not centralize a lot of that license management at the top, but it allows you to trust certain users to say, okay, within this organization realm, within the Atlassian administration module, you have the ability to provision access for this particular product for different users. So has anybody here in person or online, have you used or had familiarity with user access administration?
Yeah, we've used it.
Okay, what's your experience there?
We kind of have like a unique situation because I work for a company that is owned by a parent company, and so our cloud site is for that we use is under like our main company, but all of our Atlassian Access and like our org admin is under the parent company. So we did have the user access controls like enabled for a little bit, but we started getting like duplicate accounts for people that were logging in under the wrong domain. So we disabled it.
Gotcha. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with like Atlassian at all. It was the way that our security was set up.
Gotcha. All right. Anybody else? No? All right. Well, hopefully in a year or two from now, if that question comes up again, we'll be like, yeah, I played around with it and either it was great or not great. Going back to something that Josh mentioned earlier, is an organization admin the same as a site admin, or is that different? The answer right now is yes, they are one and the same. And so your follow-up question might be, well, why do we have two different names for what is essentially the same role? So in the earlier days of cloud, when Atlassian was pushing cloud as the go-to product for its suite of tools, they had different levels of administration. They had the organization administrator, which, like I said earlier, was responsible for org level stuff. And then they had what was called a site administrator. So if you were on that enterprise plan and you had 5 or 6 different sites associated to a single organization, by being a site administrator, you would have had the ability to manage one of those specific sites within your organization. Apparently that was confusing to a lot of users, and it seemed like an unnecessary extra level of administration. So Atlassian did away with the site administration nomenclature in favor of organization administrator. They haven't cleaned up their mess though, because if you stand up a new cloud site, you'll get a group by default that's called site admins. So that's kind of the history there. But yeah, as far as like going forward, the different levels you see here is what's in play on the cloud, right? And obviously things can change pretty frequently on the cloud, so this might be outdated by next year. I don't know. One thing I want to point out as a key difference between the cloud administrator model versus the data center administrator model, aside from those changes at the org versus system administrator level, is that in data center, if you remember, to be able to manage marketplace applications, you needed to be a system administrator, which would, if based on our conversation, you would think would correlate to being an org administrator. But actually in the cloud, if you want to be able to manage marketplace applications, you would just need the Jira administrator level access to be able to manage that, because the applications live at the site. So yeah, that's a little bit of a difference there. So that either adds to some flexibility or takes away from it, but thought I'd point out that key difference. So any questions or comments on cloud administration before we move on? You have a lot of different levels of administration to work with here, right? So hopefully this sheds some light in future discussions you may have, like what type of administrator does this person need to be, right? So, all right. Okay, I forgot I had discussion questions here. So I'm curious though, like I know we have different Atlassian sites represented here in this event, but as of right now, what is your administrator distribution across those different roles? Like, are you pretty top heavy? Would you say that your administration model is reflective of a best practice? Anybody know?
Not quite sure. I think we're pretty close to the standard model there.
Okay.
I don't feel like we have a lot of top level admin at our company.
Mm-hmm.
So we keep that small. And I'm sure we have a ton of board administrators.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We have a ton of board administrators. Yep.
We do the same, we follow pretty much the standard. Jackson.
Good. Good. Okay. Do you I know I shared some examples earlier about why some people did end up receiving administrator access when they didn't need to, but does anybody have any additional reasons that you've encountered where people received administrator access when probably shouldn't have?
Sometimes it's because there's no dedicated Jira admin.
Okay. Okay. So if you don't have like a go-to person, did your company temporarily grant that to someone to say like, okay, you'll just be our point person for now, or?
No, they hired me.
Oh, okay. So that was you. All right. Okay.
Well, but I also think, kind of to his point, there are people where Jira admin is only one of the things that they do.
Yeah.
And then
Correct,
so
yeah.
sometimes they get overwhelmed, they've got too much going on, and so they just slap somebody else's name in there just so they don't have to do it all themselves.
Right. Right. Yeah, that is a good point. Depending on your site, you may not need full-time administrator. You may not have full-time administrator work specifically for one system, right? So.
And I think to call out in general, a reason is lack of understanding of the tool. So when, like, it might be that you don't have the right roles defined with the right kind of permissions. And so going to administrator is just easy. Or people don't know enough to go find out if that's a problem. And they, like you were saying, kind of alluding to earlier, which is, this is the easy way forward. And if you don't have dedicated administrators, everybody's balancing, it's like, I can't get my team lead what they need, but if I make them an admin, it solves the problem by the way, and we can get on with our day. And so, like, I think on my team, we've probably got 2 people that are project admins that don't need to be, but it was just easy at a point. And luckily, we're a small team, so I can watch them and nobody's doing anything malicious. But yeah, it's lack of understanding of the tool and path of least resistance, kind of those 2 together.
Gotcha. Yeah, and just to summarize that, what Foy was saying there is that in response to the second question, if you don't really understand the tool, then you just might give someone that access just to clear whatever hurdles in front of you, right? So
What he means is to get them to shut up.
yeah, that is the succinct and raw, honest way to put it, right? So
Like, I flipped all the switches that should give you access to that, and you told me you don't have it, and I'm gonna say, you're an admin now.
yeah, get out of my hair, right? I've given you everything. I can't give you anything more, right?
Give
Which
you
is really
anything
saying,
more.
I don't understand enough to figure out what I'm not doing.
Yeah.
Basically,
You know how you
Right.
scare them though. You can say, "I'm giving you admin, but whatever you mess up, you're fixing."
Oh, there you go. That's right.
And you lie and say, I'll know.
That's right. You do have the audit log that tracks who makes these changes. Yeah. So
You started on the audit fund.
right. All right. The next principle I want to talk about is like the golden rule of Jira administration. Do unto others what they cannot do for themselves. So the reasoning behind this one is that and I might have briefly alluded to this earlier, is that oftentimes there are people that will ask you for help for being able to do things that they could otherwise do on their own, right? I think I brought up the example of like a board administrator coming to me asking me to update their column mapping, and I'm like, I don't need to do that for you, but I will add the status for you, and then however you want to configure your board, you see fit, right? So yeah, that's kind of the reasoning there with having multiple levels of administration, right? You can divvy out that responsibility so you don't have to centralize it into one, unless you have a setup where you are the go-to person for everything. One engagement I worked with an organization. They had 2 people that managed the Jira site. They were the system admins, the Jira admins, the project admins, and the board admins. And it worked for them. They standardized everything across all their projects, and it was okay for them, but it was hard for me to understand, right? But
Well, it's not scalable.
it's not scalable if they needed to scale. You're right. Yeah. So and I've seen in the past where sometimes, again, to get people to stop talking to them or stop bugging me, right? It's like, okay, this is a fairly straightforward request. I'm just going to do this for you, right? And then get you out of my hair, right? That doesn't add more clarity to what people can and cannot do, right? One of the things I remember, this was before I became a Jira administrator, but I was working on a project, and my boss made me a project administrator for a specific project. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I could do. And then later I was like, hey, can we like rearrange the order of fields or something like that? And I was like, okay, we can do it. And then he did it, and then he found out later that I could do it. And he showed me, he was like, dude, you could have done this by yourself the whole time. I'm like, I didn't know, you didn't tell me, man. Right. So that was interesting. But yeah, what happens if you do for others what they can do?
You will continue to do it.
Right. Has anybody been in a situation like that by any chance?
I have a dev that every time he needs to run a query to find something, he pings me. I'm not even the Scrum Master anymore. He's on a completely different team, but he still pings me and says, Erica, I need to find this. And I'm like, well, can't you run a query? And he's like, can you just run it for me?
Oh, really? Oh, no.
How can a dev not know how to run a query?
To be able to do it for themselves, you make their failure to do it permanent.
Wow, that's profound.
I didn't like that.
Oh, okay, I was like, oh, I know, I was like, this event just went to a whole other level and I'm not ready for that. Yeah, Josh, I think you had something to say or?
No, I just said, how does a dev not know how to run a query?
Yeah, so
That's the deeper question, right?
I don't think he doesn't know how. I think it's more along the lines of he would prefer that I do it, but.
Do you guys know about the Control K shortcut
The Control K shortcut.
in Jira?
Oh, period.
What does the
No,
Control K, what does the Control K?
The shortcut bar.
Oh, is that like the
It pulls
command
up-
palette that we saw?
Yeah, it pulls
Oh,
up the command
okay.
palette and you can search for anything.
Nice.
Okay, yeah, so Control K or Command K. If you're on a Mac, is it Command K?
That's correct.
Okay, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously we definitely want to drive towards, you know, education and clarity and understanding, right? So saying no sometimes is the best thing to do. How do you how would you facilitate that conversation and communicate that do it yourself mentality without, you know, being mean, I guess you could say? Like, what are some strategies you've taken, or am I just trying to be nice in a situation that wouldn't necessarily warrant that?
You're just being nice, Sam.
I'm just being, okay, thank you, Jeff.
Just make sure it's documented, and the next time they ask you, just keep sending them back to the same document.
Yeah, you send them the link.
Send them the
to
link.
documentation.
And if you wanna-
that tells them how to
Gonna
do
be
it.
really passive aggressive, just forward them the message you sent them the last time.
Okay, all right. So we got record keeper over here.
Make yourself an endless loop. They come to you, you go right back, they come to you, they go right back, send it right back to them.
All right.
Or you can be actively trying to say, this is really cool and actually really easy to do, come here, and you just show them.
Yeah, but he's saying the second time.
No, yeah, the second and third time, and I usually like, if I've got the time, it's like, oh yeah, no, that's really cool, and I act like we've never talked about it before. Come here, and then like, as I'm showing them, they realize that we've had this conversation.
uh-huh.
If you preface it with, if you don't wanna have to wait,
Mm.
you can sign your own.
Yeah, you can.
That usually drives.
That's actually pretty good, yeah. If you want faster response times, here's how you can do it yourself.
If I have the time, I go the opposite direction and I start asking them a whole bunch of clarification questions.
Oh,
To the point where it's easier for them to do it themselves than it is to ask me.
gotcha.
Because I'm like, so what do you need again? How do I spell that?
Artificially complicate the process, right?
It's like, so by the time I've asked them all those questions, they've been walking through the steps the whole
Yeah.
time and
They've already written the query.
they've already
Right,
written the
yeah.
query by then.
Right. Lauren mentioned, you know, hey bud, you got this. All right. I like the opening encouragement there. Here's a page in Confluence. If you need to search for something, Chat GPT knows JQL. So, well, that sounded very positive to start with, and then it got to the level we're at right now. But it's fair. It's fair.
Oh.
Yeah.
I do love the Confluence documentation. If you document your processes on Confluence, then you just send people links to it and it's great.
Right. Right.
No, I had a friend that would just send me to, LMGTFY.
That's what I'm saying.
LMGTFY. It's been a while.
Was it Beaver?
No.
Oh, we don't have to name drop here. I mean, not that I know anybody, but. Yeah. All right. The third principle I want to talk about, is that it is important to genericize your configuration. And it's funny because Kim, you and I were having a
Yeah,
conversation along
we
this
are.
angle this way, and we're kind of still having that conversation.
Wow.
Wow. We'll have to talk about that afterwards. But yeah, I mean, especially when you're working at the Jira administration level, right? Taking the extra effort to try to be generic as possible and not be too specific, even if it seems like it's extra work in the interim, does pay off in the long run. So I'll give a couple of examples. Workflows are obviously a sticking point. I remember having a conversation with an entity down in Florida. They were just asking for some best practices. And so they reached out to me and they said, hey, we have workflows, we have statuses in our workflows where they're all the same name, but we have the initials of the person that is doing that you know, particular task in that particular status appended to the status. So you had like a in progress DP, in progress JF, in progress SN. And she was like, this is not good, right? I'm like, no, it's definitely not good, right? It's bad, it's horrible, right? And so I never
Why
heard from
would
them
you even
again.
do that?
You know, I think I think ultimately that came down to like a lack of knowledge. Like we have an assignee field in Jira to capture that information. So you wouldn't want that information stored in the status level of a workflow, right? I've seen other things too where I've seen dot notation in issue types. One side I'm looking at, they have a few hundred issue types, but most of them are like an apps dot telecom dot, you know, server, whatever. But if you look at the issue types, you realize that you could capture that information in a custom field dropdown and then genericize the issue type so that the issue type is more transferable, right? And depending on the configuration, there are various levels of specificity you want to like strive towards, right? Otherwise, you limit your reusability and you end up having multiple configurations of the same thing that can't be used because contextually doesn't make sense, right? So keeping an eye towards reusability is important at that level. And Josh mentioned, you know, labels are very effective and use them a lot in your automation rules. Yeah, that is a nice balance where you have some customizability as to what values are in that field, but it's stable enough that you can do searches against those values and, you know, like in this case, being able to use them in automation rules. So, yeah. And then I know we already just talked about this. What happens if you configure some things too specifically? But I'm curious to know, how would you handle someone who wants something configured specifically, even though it's not like a good practice? What are some techniques you've taken? And no, Kim, this is not, I'm not asking this question here because I'm gonna answer you. No, I literally put this together before we even had the conversation.
What Sam did this afternoon to me was.
Oh my goodness, no. I've got the hey bud Lauren coming in here. I like it. That's your tagline there.
Hey, bud.
Lauren, if I ever have a conversation with you in the future and you say, hey bud, I know that it's going down south right away. So
I think you asked them, like drafting requirements from any entity, you wanna really understand why they wanna do something and maybe identify a better way to do it, and then like maybe with a client and you got your internal customers and which your external customers, not only do you tell them, hey, what you think would be a more ideal way of handling it, but why and how it will help them and their teammates and their organization. And failing that, depending on how specific it is and how detrimental it might be, the main focus is making sure that the team can work and feel successful and that things go forward. So sometimes, you know, using a label isn't ideal, but it might be okay as long as it's crazy.
right.
You know, so there's some flex there. But definitely ask why. Why do you need it so specifically and not in an antagonistic way?
Yeah.
Understand?
Hey, bud, why?
Yeah. Hey bud, why? That's
Why?
right.
Why would you do that?
That's right.
Yes, that's when you do the tell me more, right?
That's
Why
really-
the
that's really
judgment? So
interesting. I never
tell me
Tell me
more
more. Yep.
about this label. and
Oh,
how
no,
it's
I've had that backfire on me.
used.
Oh, do tell. Do tell. What
Well,
happened?
there is this gentleman that I work with in our governance section, and he genuinely believes that if you make all of your instructions detailed and specific enough, that everybody will always do it right. And so he's always pushing for this sort of exactly this kind of hyper customization.
Gotcha.
Because in the back of his head, he's sort of working on the premise that, well, if I have like 5 case statements, they'll all like pick the right one and then flow down the right path, and everything when it gets to me will all be worked out. And when I was discussing documentation with him, like he wanted to have these very hyper specific case-based flow chart style instructions on how to do things. And I'm like, you're actually just increasing the chances that people are going to do it wrong. He still doesn't believe me, but like, so I contend with this a lot with him because he genuinely believes that if he makes it specific enough that people won't be able to do it wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's his mental model, and you can't imagine other mental models, you know,
Mhm.
different ways to
Mhm.
interpret the same information.
And so in that case, you can't take that on directly, because the more directly you try to take it on, the harder he's gonna hold on to that mental model and tell you he absolutely positively has to have it that way.
Mhm.
And you kind of got to back off a little bit and give everybody a little bit of breathing room. First line of defense, hope he forgets about it. The second line of defense, maybe kind of work some solutions in the background once you're figuring out why he's really having this issue, and then present him with an alternative, but not saying, here's my alternative to what you wanted to do. You kind of have to give him a chance to get off that track, and then kind of come at it from the side. So then he sees your solution and goes, oh, I like that. I'm going to suggest we do that instead.
Mhm.
Because again, it's like, you can't challenge him directly, because it's going to make him double down on it. Because nobody likes to be told they're not right.
Right.
I mean, like, everybody is like that.
Mhm. Lauren did remind us that we are recording this, so we might have to have a post-recording grievances to air out, right? Otherwise, this is permanently cemented in the.
Well,
internet.
he's a lovely person, and I do adore him.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's just he really does hold a certain set of beliefs, and you can't sway him from it once he gets down that track.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Josh pointed out that there are some configurations that do have to be more specific in nature, which completely makes sense, right? You know, it's not like you can avoid specificity at the administration level all the time, right? It's just, and we've kind of talked about this here, right? Having that conversation, taking that extra step to understand the larger context, right? I mean, in a lot of our jobs, that's what we do on a daily basis, right? It's no different from a system administration perspective, right? So yeah, and then, and like Josh mentioned here, you know, for any special requests, you'll, you know, basically communicate I mean, the reality of making that change, right? So that they're more informed, right? And that's driving toward that clarity by increasing transparency and, you know, just helping people understand the larger context, right? So good conversation. The last principle I want to talk about today that I identified is to create communication channels, and that kind of feeds into the discussion that we were just having, right? Something I've learned is to, like, when you're having this discussion with people, you know, never only say no or yes, right? If someone asks for something and if you just give a one-word answer, that might help you get out of having additional conversation when you don't want it, but in the long run, it doesn't help with much, right? You don't explain why, you don't give people a clear sense of direction, you don't give people the tools that they need to equip themselves for future conversations, right? So, yeah, one-word answers. I know there are moments where sometimes I will just be strongly tempted to take the easy way out, right? And that, you know, backfires, and sometimes I just have to take a step back and, you know, come back into it. Just so that we have a conversation, because at the end of the day, we're all working together, right? Whether it's within a site or within a team or across teams, right? I don't think there would be conflicting objectives there. We're all trying to do a good job, the best that we can. And then as part of that as part of creating those communication channels, encouraging that negotiation, right? So, well, I don't say negotiation to mean that, you know, there's definitely a war between, you know, one side versus the other, but, you know, depending on the issue, you may have a lot more back and forth than you may realize. But it's a matter of driving towards that shared objective, and sometimes whatever conclusion you reach is a compromise between both parties. Sometimes it swings one way, sometimes it swings the other way, right? But making sure that you've taken all the factors into account is a part of the process, and it oftentimes can be a scenic tour, which isn't always a bad thing, but it's just something to keep in mind. Lauren, you mentioned you usually qualify your yes or no with a question about timing. Do you want to elaborate on that? Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't sure. So that's something that being direct about timing is I feel helps a lot of like me get a better understanding of what the situation is immediately. Like when you're talking about, oh, I just need this real quick. Well, is it real quick? Like, let's talk about that. Like, it's something I picked up from my help desk days, and it stuck with me and has served me really well.
Yeah, that's a good point because, not everything is always a fire that needs to be put out, and that oftentimes can be a matter of perspective, right? Between the person that needs it and the person that can, deliver it, right? So.
Well, I find sometimes people have a hard time separating what's urgent from what's important.
Mm.
And I think that simply because something is urgent, that means that it needs to be right now. It's like, well, it might be urgent, but it's not very important.
Mhm.
Or this is very important, but since there's a whole bunch of other things that are more urgent, they're ignoring the important thing.
Gotcha. Yeah. And now we're getting into some more help desk specific conversations, right? Because, in previous conversations, it's like, don't let people creating issues tell you what level of priority it is, for example, right? But yeah, that's definitely another conversation that we could have and learn a lot from.
I think this principle and a couple of the prior ones speak to generally why it's so valuable to take the time when you have it to educate all members of your team or your ecosystem to help them and to help you in the future, which can also be help desk, helping people out, solving their own problems. Just because it's a great tool, and if people think they can't, they won't engage with it, and if they don't engage with it, they're gonna miss out and they're gonna have a harder time, and then they're gonna need administrators more, for example. So I think just cultivating that, creating good documentation for reference when you have processes that you're going through again, or using existing documentation for Jira, or you can, just like I said, like my example of the ignorance of the tool. Addressing that ignorance for myself and for my teammates, so that we're not doing things willy-nilly, everybody isn't an administrator when they don't need to be. It's just, it pays back dividends like all kinds of training and like intern training does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, putting all of these efforts in all of these various areas may not reap rewards right away, but over time it does build up, and if you do it right, it adds value, right?
It makes them better professionals too. If they move to a different team or a different company, they put Jira on their resume, but they show up and they don't know how to use it. They just happen to be at a company that used it.
Yeah.
Better if they know what they're doing.
Right. One thing I do is, especially when it comes to configuration requests, depending on the type of configuration request, I'll usually ask for like a 1 or 2 sentence description of what you're planning to like use the new configuration for, or to again drive towards that larger context, right? So if you need a new project created, what do you need this project for, right? It's not me like saying, no, I'm not trying to like guilt trip anybody into not asking for projects, but it's like, hey, if you're asking for a specific project type and this is what you're going to use it for, I may be able to give you a better recommendation that you haven't considered because I know something you don't, or vice versa, right? If you know something that I don't, then I can be aware and open to what you're trying to accomplish, and that helps build up my internal database of knowledge. So
do you want a whole other project because you just need another board?
Do you want a whole other project because you need another board? Yeah, right. So yeah. Are there any other comments or thoughts that anybody has on, at least on this principle? Are there any other principles that we haven't talked about from a Jira administration perspective that anyone wants to volunteer?
I think to this one real quick, just creating communication channels and keeping them open. So
yeah,
not just this is the way it is because this is how the project was made 3 years ago, and this is what we do, and this is why we do it. But using those inquiries to, oh, I want something different, or I want something custom, should be the conversation of continuous improvement. My project isn't a great story of continuous improvement, but we've changed our workflows 4 times in 2 years, and some of those have been progressive improvements. And it's just, like, did it need to be changed? Was it better to change it? Why are we changing it? And keeping the standards and practices, using proper formats and structures, but saying, is this serving our best needs? Do we have too many statuses? Do we have too many boards? Going lean, but the continuous communication and the buy-in from the team, again, draws them into the tool and encourages them to learn about it. So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you added that little bit of a wrinkle to just, it's not just enough to create that communication channel, but it's another task in and of itself to keep it open, right? So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
And kind of going back to one of your earlier points a little bit, people don't know what they don't know. And so, sometimes you have to show them that there's a better way to do it, or you have to show them that something can be done. We did a whole learning session on creating custom dashboards because there were a lot of people that never realized, hey, I can get a list of everything that's assigned to me across different boards.
That's
like
crazy.
it didn't even occur to them that that was something that they could do for themselves. And of course, because it didn't occur to them, well, they never went back and did it. And they're not going to ask you for that because it doesn't even occur to them that that's something that they could have. So sometimes you kind of have to make that mental leap too, to say, what do they not even realize is possible?
Right, because then they're more frustrated, like using the tool. They're like, I don't know how to find my work. I have to go to this board. I have to go to this board. I can't find things. And if they could like help themselves and just write this dashboard to find all my tickets that are due like within a week or whatever, it just helps them adopt it better, and then they become champions too and super users, and it just like trickles down.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the success story, you taught me JQL, and now all of a sudden, like, it opened up a whole world of things that I could use it for, and other people are starting to use it. And now we've got dashboards, we've got widgets on Confluence pages and things where people are getting that self-service and they're not having to sit around and be frustrated that everything's opaque to them. But when I go and ask people, it's like, okay, you're frustrated. Like, what do you need? And they're like, no, I just don't know what status this project is in. And I'm like, does this dashboard help?
Did you know you could have done this yourself?
And they're like, wait, this does help.
So cool.
I didn't even notice that.
Wherever applicable, when I build a dashboard for people, if it's applicable, I sneak the assign a new widget onto it. Just a little extra thing on the bottom. Like I built a UAT dashboard for the clients. So they got some users who are not in Jira very often. Like, you can find which tickets are assigned right here.
Okay, you're sneaking some dashboard gadgets in there. Okay.
One of my dev leads loves the mentions me widget.
Yeah.
So
really? Okay.
Well, because that way, if it's mentioning you in the comments, so what he likes to do is he likes to go into a Jira ticket, and if he needs to do something, he makes a comment and he @s himself. And it turns his dashboard into a to-do list.
Interesting. Okay.
Because then he can just pull up the mentions me widget and go, this. Oh, somebody else wants me to do something.
Oh, nice. I've never heard of that, but that's pretty creative.
Yeah.
Josh said that their company uses Slack to communicate, and they have channel-specific Jira integrations, which are key to communicating and asking for additional information. That is a really good setup you have there, Josh. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on how that's paid off in, like a specific area or something, or?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'd say the biggest one is we have a separate project for any kind of like pushes to production that are going to be done. So like after, like the pre-work has already been completed and we're ready to roll it out, we have this project called CMOPS, and we open a ticket there, and anytime a ticket in that project is created, it puts out an alert to one of our Slack channels, letting everyone know, like, hey, we have this, update we're pushing out. So if you notice anything that's related, just let us know. And then it communicates, you know, when the rollout's been done and completed. And, you know, if anything happens or if anything else breaks, you know, we know what caused it.
Something I need to be better about is the integration where you can take a Slack message and make it a ticket. That,
Yeah.
oh, so good. Like,
So it works both
amazing.
ways, yeah.
Yeah.
So do y'all want to do like one of these on how to integrate Jira and Slack?
We can.
Be a little emoji. Put
It's
this
it's
emoji
really
on.
easy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and that'll kind of feed into like our closing thoughts here in a little bit, but yeah, I mean, that's a really cool use case for that, and I've heard that before. How many of you here have
Another
like
one,
Slack channels? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say another one is that I have set up is like I have a separate Jira project for anything that someone, you know, requests of me. So like if they want me to do something, I just tell them to open a ticket in my Jira project. And then anytime someone opens a ticket in that project, I get a Slack message from Jira.
Oh, nice. Okay,
And then I can
sweet.
just click on the ticket and whatever.
Is that like a subscription, like, I have, when I get bugs come in?
It's different from a filter subscription,
Okay.
but it's the same concept. You get a notification at a certain interval
Mhm.
about stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, anybody else here use Slack or Teams or whatever communication channel to, you know, keep yourself notified or keep the team notified of things?
We haven't, but I think they're too much of a fire hose and we just mute them.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it gets difficult to make them.
Mhm.
meaningful.
So there's a sweet spot.
If you could make a Jira ticket from a Teams chat, that would be nice.
You can.
You can. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing some really juicy ideas for future topics. So
Now I'm
so that's
interested.
exciting. As far as closing thoughts here, just want to remind the group that, you know, if you haven't already joined our group, if you just go to the Lansing chapter at ace.atlassian.com, anytime we post new events, you'll get a notification for them. As far as subscribing to our YouTube channel, if you just search for Lansing Atlassian Community Chapter, you'll get like one result or something like that. So that'll be an easy way to find us. And then we do have a Trello board that we're trialing out from a retro we did earlier. So the link to that board is on our group page. If you're not able to access it, please let me know. But yeah, we're trying something out. So, you know, like I said at the very beginning, we're talking about this because it was a choice that I made to talk about, right? But I'd like to crowdsource some topics in the future. So we'll try to use that medium there. And Lauren, you said you used it to plan your wedding. So that kind of jives in nicely with the talk you did earlier on Trello, right? As far as what's coming in 2024, we are working on, you know, doing a series of community events that are focused specifically on Confluence. So haven't fleshed that out to the point where we have anything scheduled on the group page, but I'm really excited about it. And I hope that you'll be able to join us along for that journey. We'll also be looking at, you know, trying to host these events in different locations as well, just because, you know, there's people all over that can join. I mean, we probably won't make a trip down to Huntsville. I'm sorry, but I mean, that would be cool. That would be cool. Don't get me wrong. And then of course we do have, our leadership team for the chapter is growing. Tyler, who was just here, he's a co-leader now for the chapter. So, hopefully I'll be able to talk less in the future, but, yeah, we're excited about the stuff that's, you know, coming up in the next year. And, you know, if you're joining us for the first time, just know that you're always welcome. You know, we are a community without borders. And if you know anybody else that could benefit from these conversations, we've already seen that value added to, you know, other members of the community chapter. But, you know, there's always something new you can learn that you don't even realize you can. So, and I will feed you if you show up in person. So speaking of which, before we get going, can I just get like a picture of like everybody just to let Atlassian know, hey, we had a cool virtual or a hybrid event. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, no, we don't have to be eating. Boy, since you're at the end of the table, can you take a picture? Sweet. I guess it should be a selfie too, because I want you in the shot.
Nah.
Oh, man, okay.
Not that flexible.
Okay, I won't force anybody.
All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Very nice.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. For those of you that joined us online, thank you so much. This recording will be up on YouTube sometime before the end of the year when I get to it. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And-
Great.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah, thanks for having
Bye,
us.
Lauren.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah, I will say one of those other things, like when you get into